I do want to thank you for being here and taking the time to do this interview. Um, I think you have an interesting story to tell, one that's got some inspiration, one that's going to be informative. So, uh, let's start with just a little bit about you. So, tell me a little bit about you and some of your background.
Sure. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Jay. My name is Henry Seals. I'm from West Virginia in the United States. My parents came from, I'm explaining this. I was at a party a week ago, it's mostly Nigerians, actually almost all Nigerians and some Liberians, all Africans. I was in the States and they asked me, so where are you from? And I said, I'm US. They go, no, 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 where are your parents from? And I'm like, North Carolina, West Virginia. And she looked at me, one of the women looked at me and said, oh, you're American. I'm so sorry. So I realized,
Wow.
I know she was being funny to a degree, but it was funny. She got me good. But I wanted to, it made me realize I need to explain a little more context than I would usually give, just because the audience may be various different types of Black folk and white folk as well, different types of folks. So let me just be mindful of that. And so I'm from West Virginia. My father's family is primarily from West Virginia and Alabama, as far back as they know. My mother's family is from North Carolina, as far back as they know. So I grew up in West Virginia, the capital. I'll be at the capital, but still West Virginia. The second of three boys. So my older brother, I wouldn't say typical firstborn, but very outgoing, very, very, very outgoing human. I born after him, take after him because he's my older brother. But I was also a little more, I think we naturally sort of try to fill in the gaps in our families. You know what I'm saying? So I
Right.
was the one who was more intellectual, more thinking person, meaning he would act, but I would be sitting there going, why did he do that? Or if he got in trouble, I'm like, I'm not going to do that, right? Type of thing. And then my brother comes along and he's even more mindful, I think, of trouble, watching his older brother, do things and move forward. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Sorry. My family brought in my breakfast because they knew I'd be speaking with you early this morning. Thanks, sweetie. So so when I was growing up, West Virginia was a small place in my mind. You watching TV, you see TV shows like, if I were to date myself, it'd be things like Welcome Back, Kotter, Good Times, The Jeffersons, All in the Family, and then TV shows like Buck Rogers. So I knew West Virginia was small, and I needed to get out of it if I wanted to experience the world. And so, from a very young age, I wanted to leave just to see the world. I thought, again, my addition to my family would be seeing the world, because no one in my family had really traveled the world other than, I guess, maybe my uncle worked for the government, but I wasn't aware of that as a 5-year-old. So I thought if I traveled the world and saw really cool things, I could share that with my family. And that's what sort of sat in my brain and propelled me. I think it's the motivator that's gotten me here to Japan. So I attended school in West Virginia and Virginia. Attended Harvard University, which was something I thought, even as a young 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old boy, that would help propel me globally, because a lot of presidents went there, a lot of famous people, a lot of intellectuals, even Black intellectuals, W.B. Du Bois, that I had learned about probably in junior high school, long after I thought about going to Harvard. These were sort of like steps in the plan. We're young people, we plan our lives, we think we know everything, and that was part of my plan. So I attended Harvard. I studied East Asian Studies, a way again to sort of to see a more exotic part of the world that no one in my family had really experienced. I'd learned about Europe and even South America from my family. My father was an American history teacher.
Mm.
So again, I would naturally want to say, okay, I want to study Asia or Africa in order to add something to that tapestry that's my family. That's just how my brain works. I want people to understand that it wasn't a case of, you know, um, I come from a family of intellectuals, or I come from a family. I mean, my parents are smart, I think, but I came from a family of just country folks doing their best, and I thought that I could add value by being the global one.
Mm.
And guess what? I am the global one of all my family members, close family members. So I come to Japan in '94 as an exchange student. Had a profoundly interesting and rewarding experience in Japan at that time. Had a host family. That comes in the context of I had a host family. My host family was very typical Japanese from Kansai area. I was in Kyoto. They had hosted other students, but I was the first Black one, and they told me this. Right at some point, it became apparent to me that I was the first, Black exchange student. And it came up in the context of my father. I was overheard a conversation with my mother, host mother, and a friend of hers. And as they were speaking, and I couldn't really understand everything they said, they were sort of looking at me as they were speaking. And I was sort of across the room. And I said, they're talking about me. I wonder what that is. And so about a week later, maybe my mother thought I understood or something, but a week later, my father, host father, was sitting down next to me in the living room. No one else was around. Maybe that was by design. He set me down and said, something I have to tell you. And I said, what? He goes, and he points at himself in very broken English, and he goes, stupid man. And he pointed at himself. And I said, what do you mean? And basically what he explained to me was that when they got my prospectus, a picture of me, and this is a student that's coming to this, on this program. They were informed that no other families wanted me, right? And they had already quit the program. They weren't hosting any more students, but they were asked, please, can you take this student? And sorry, I say father-in-law, my host father, my host father, was adamantly against it. He had heard stories about them people. He had heard them from Americans many years before, 20, 30 years before, 20 years before. He
Hmm.
had heard stories. He's like, no. My host mother disagreed with him. She wasn't Western globalized, but I found out my host mother was born in Manchuria. She's one of those Japanese, right? Part of the Japanese were like, hey, go move to Manchuria, live in China. So she grew up her in China. So I think that probably played a role in her thinking, hey, you know what? We can't exclude him because of how he looks. Stereotypes are stereotypes, right? My host sister presently had just graduated from University of Washington or Washington State. Washington State. Don't want to get that wrong. Drew Bledsoe, I think it's Washington State. Don't want to get that wrong. Um, Washington State, and she told him that's unacceptable, right? And I think because of what she may have experienced in America or just her perspective. And my
Hmm.
host brother wasn't there, but he was studying at Arizona State University.
Mm.
So they told him, he told me they told him, no, he's coming, and you're going to accept him into our family. Now, I didn't feel different around him. He didn't really treat me badly. He was kind of weird. He would say things kind of stereotypically to me about music every now and then, like, do you know Sam Cooke? Do you know this and that? But nothing overtly racist. And so he said to me, he goes, you're my son. Don't forget that. And he goes, I'm sorry. And I'm like, damn. So that type of thing, the fact I was breaking bread, didn't know it with someone who was racist, who was sort of trained to believe a certain way, and that he sees me as his son, and he proved to me he was my father. The day of the week he died of cancer in 2002, I believe. And the week he died, I had spoken to him, called him, and he was in the hospital. I visited him in the hospital a couple of weeks before, so I knew he was leaving. But he was telling the people in the hospital, my son called me. My son called me, right? So that had a profound effect on me as regards to how people can change. And the moments where I want to be bitter or upset that the world hasn't offered me X, Y, or Z, I know that there's a way, not only on me, but there's a way to make things better. So that's the perspective when I come into when I if I talk about the challenges I had in my life or whatnot, and I seem kind of positive about it. It's because of these experiences, not somehow I'm just in denial of how difficult the world can be. So I just wanted to preface that. I have 5 children. Um, uh, I've been married before, several times before. I think I've gotten it right now. I'll be honest. We all have challenges. Mine was trying to figure out how to be um, um, a good husband. My wife is from Jamaica, um, and I have 5 daughters. So they're all girls. The oldest is 25, and the youngest is 11. And they take care of me in various different ways. And I work as the chief operating officer of a company called Zyco, as well as I volunteer teaching children entrepreneurship through a program my wife's developed. And I'm Japan's first foreign-born human rights commissioner, which we can get into later, as well as I advise on other startups as well. And that's me. I like video games and comic books,
Oh, we're
but
gonna get all
I
of
don't.
that.
That's on the back end. I don't talk about that because I don't want to.
Well, no, but it's good. I think there's a lot that, you have a very interesting journey and you brought up a lot of points. And you know, that situation with your host father is I agree, it sounds like a very profound experience. And to be clear, the reason why they were having trouble placing you was because people didn't want to take a
Yeah,
black
my
man,
color.
a black child into their home, right?
Yes, exactly. Didn't
Right.
matter what university I was from. So people say, well, you're Harvard. That helped you in life. It helped in certain ways, but it didn't help me when it came to being
It's
a
still
host because
black.
I'm still black,
Yeah.
to some people.
Right.
No, it did break the ice a lot of times too in Japan.
Right.
It helped, but when people don't know you, just a picture on a piece of paper,
Hmm.
especially probably a black and white photo, probably. It's challenging, but
Right.
I think about it. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt anymore thinking about it because the result has been fantastic. I'd rather have a family that wanted me than a family that didn't. To be honest, you see TV shows like the Super Friends or any TV show or cartoon, particularly. I use those as an example because they're very visual. You don't have two of the same type of character. They're always different.
Mm.
And I think that consciously humans we want a little diversity in our lives, at least right. And so I think we naturally, I said before, we naturally want to fit in the gaps. We actually want to complement the environment we're in. So um, seeing that I was able to bridge that kind of gap between Japanese and foreigners or Japanese and blacks or whatever, I said, wow, that's a really unique role, right? I hadn't heard of people doing that type of thing. So I wanted to work in Japan upon graduation to sort of be that bridge, you know, that other people can walk along and I can walk along that bridge as well, but other people can walk along. So profound effect on me because I can believe it could be done. So even if someone said, I don't like you, or I said, I know this can be done, maybe not with you, but with someone.
Right.
And, I started my career in Japanese corporate at the bottom, new graduate. I've built my career over 20, how long have I been working since 96? So 28 years of just working and failures, successes, more failures, a little bit more successes, and the typical journey. But I'm a product of that principle and the results of it. And it does work. It's provided my family and me with financial security, provided me with career security. It's provided my network and I think with value. It's
Mm.
allowed me to receive value from by being in rooms. My natural tendency to think that maybe I don't belong or maybe people are going to dislike me. By stepping in those rooms, I've given myself opportunities that I never would have had otherwise. So, um, and I've written two books. I just want to state for a moment. As I was going through this journey, I said, wait, I've got to share this with other people so that they can have the same toolkit or a little additional perspective to help them not give up.
Right.
Um, uh, and so I wrote a book.
I definitely want to get into the books as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So the book is Making It in Japan. I wrote in 2000 after working 2 years in a Japanese company as a new grad. And then my latest book is Reading the Air, which is pretty much the continuation of that book. It sort of starts right where that ended, but also explains a little bit about there's testimonials, not really testimonials, but the experience of other executives who've worked in Japan, and what they've learned to help others who are trying to build a career in Japan be successful doing so.
Right. Well, let's back up a little bit, and you mentioned coming from a small town,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're in Japan, but you went from a small town to Harvard, which is not
Mm-hmm.
a small feat in itself,
Right.
and then come into Japan. So briefly, how did that go, getting from West Virginia into Harvard?
Harvard.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me tell you, I can tell you how it happened. So I told my father, because I had it's funny. I saw this movie. It's not the impetus, but I saw this movie called Soul Man. I don't know if you've heard of it. C. Thomas
C. Thomas
Howell and
Howell,
James Earl
yeah.
Jones.
C.
Yeah,
Thomas Howell, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and James Earl Jones, and where he, acts fakes like he's black to get into Harvard Law School.
Right. And actually that has happened. Not maybe not Harvard particularly, but the actress Mindy Cohn, her brother pretended to be black to get into university.
Well, I at the time I thought to myself, I'm a kid, I'm watching this movie, and I saw what he went through. And the way I looked at it, I said, that's an experience, right? Being black at Harvard. I said that is, and I knew that my mother had studied uh, African American history in college, and she was going to college while I was growing up. So I had learned about, Eyes on the Prize and W.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey and all that kind of stuff. And so I knew about Black intellectualism and that Harvard was a place that accepted Blacks before a lot of other colleges did,
Mm,
right? A lot of intellectual schools. At least that was my perspective. I saw as a kid and I said, I want to go to that school. I think there's opportunity for me there. Also, I think my father had one friend, maybe not a friend, but a friend of a friend. They were talking about, the opportunities they've gotten, the people they were able to meet by being there, the connections they made. And again, looking around saying, life is about connections. Life is about being connected to other people. I said, I want the best connections. This is a very childish way of thinking. I said, I want to go. So when I told my father, he remembers very clearly. I came to him and said, Dad, I'm going to Harvard. He goes, okay. He goes, but 4.0s don't even get into Harvard, son. And I didn't know what 4.0 meant. I'm 8, right? I have no idea what he meant. But I read a lot of books. I was always recognized as being one of the most intelligent in my class. I wasn't. My brother was an athlete. My father was an athlete. I was an athlete. I could make friends with anybody. I felt I had the skills. I had the capability to do anything. Even those moments I didn't. I think I was. It was reinforced by my family that I could do anything. My mother was studying while I was growing up, which had an effect on me. I said, if she can do it,
right.
I can do these things, right? So, but life being the way it is, I had difficulty sort of fitting in. I couldn't I remember very clearly in seventh grade, I was having difficulty with math, algebra, and I never had difficulty studying. I wasn't an all A student. I'd rather have fun and get in trouble than study. I was like my older brother. I want to get into adventures rather than study because I felt I can always study. And I was studying on my own. I read almanacs, I read encyclopedias. I love reading, but I had difficulty. And so I said, I gave up. So for my seventh grade and eighth grade, I just didn't really care to study. Also going through puberty, finding girls and getting dumped girls, and it's all that kind of stuff. Um, but during that time, one of the things that caught my eye was, or caught my attention, was the less you studied, or less you cared about what you did in school, the less the teachers seemed to care.
Mm,
And I tried to figure out why that was. I understand now, or at least the way I looked at it is, if you show lack of interest in a person, they'll show lack of interest in you. And a
right.
teacher has spent their whole lives studying and teaching something. If you don't show interest, they're not going to show interest in you, usually, typically. I figured that out, right? I figured lots of things out, in which I'll get back to that lesson to help me in applications to college. But I learned that. And I'm naturally interested in people, but as a teenager, you're sort of caught up in yourself all the time, right? You're going through so much, you're thinking about yourself and your place in the world. So I had to think about others. And I made that a thing. And so I was a BC student, seventh, eighth grade. Then once high school started, my father reminded me that this is where it counts. My ninth grade, I was a straight A student. I did quiz bowl, academic quiz bowl. I had started running track in like eighth grade, but I started playing American football. I started trying to get myself all these experiences that I had read in history books. Great men, were skilled in many things. Great women were skilled in many things, not just one. So I took that upon me to, pad my resume, but I sincerely wanted to meet all these different types of people who play football versus people who are on quiz bowl versus people who are good in class versus, you know, people who don't study. All these people I'm mixing with and sort of understanding a little bit more about them. That's what I started to do. Um, and then I went to summer camps. My teachers started to recommend me to summer camps for free, right? I would be nominated for these programs, summer, governor's school for the gifted, all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't because I suddenly got smarter. It's because I got more invested in what I was doing. And I got invested in the people around me. And sometimes the world tells you don't be invested in people. People hurt you, but
Right.
you have to be invested. You figure out who are the right people to be invested in the more you try. And so I did that. So by the time I had gotten to time to apply to colleges and Harvard, I tried to apply my freshman year of high school. I mailed them, didn't email. I mailed them, asked for an application form. They said you don't apply yet. You don't have the credits, but they sent me application form every year. I mailed the football coach. I mailed the drama department. I told them I really wanted to go to your school. I'm interested. I read up on things about the college, and I started seeing that the people around me started to invest in me. I had my English teacher in freshman year actually drove me up to Harvard. My flew me actually. He drove me. We got robbed in New York. That's a different story. We drove back home because a car had been broken into and there was, the door wasn't working. And then he flew me the next year to visit the school, to have a meeting with the admissions office. This is before I applied. I was a junior, I think, in high school. He flew me, and he flew me, I think, because he believed in me. But I also showed interest in his class. I showed interest in him. I showed a thoughtfulness that I think, appealed to a lot of my teachers. I have teachers, Mr. Dexter, Joel, Miss Rusher, who I'll never call by her first name. But she was my American history teacher. These teachers really took me under their wing and supported me. Miss Taylor, who was a geometry teacher. Um, I know I'm forgetting some of them. And my Coach Occasion, they invested in me. I applied to many schools. I applied to William and Mary. I applied to Princeton. I applied to Army. Applied to Harvard. I applied to other schools, and I'd get interviews for like scholarship programs for some of these other schools, not Princeton or Harvard, and in the interviews, that skill set, like people interviewing me, I was interested in them. I had
Right.
trained that skill set. So I could see these interviews, the people, they were fun. And I would hear after the interview, they'd bring me to the side, the admissions officer saying, you've gotten this, son. Please come to our school. I remember Hamlin University in Minneapolis had flew me to be interviewed for their president's scholarship or something. And
And this is
right after
all
the
on
interview.
academics and interviews. This wasn't
So
they were scouting
academics,
you as
I,
a
I, I mean,
as
don't get me wrong. I'm a black student from the South. The whole diversity thing, in a good way, is they want to diversify their academics. Why
right,
wouldn't you want someone like me?
right,
I'm not being full of myself, but I'm different.
right,
I'm different. I can carry my own, and I think you want to cross pollinate. That's where the super friends comes from. Not everyone's Superman,
right,
right? Green Lantern has powers. Black Goliath has powers. Batman he doesn't have superpowers, but there's value to be added. And I think we as kids got that,
right.
right? But on academics, it didn't hurt. Like when I was applying to Harvard, I sent them of myself playing football star by any means. I was not a track star by any means. But especially now, as I work in HR and operations, when I hire someone, it's not about whether or not they have the best resume. It's about resilience. It's about being able to think differently. It's about dealing with challenges and adversity that can help you help the group you're a part of. The reality is much more complex than the news ever is about. The world's very complicated. But yeah, I'm not going to hide the fact I was an athlete. See, I have gym equipment behind me. I think having a fit mind and a fit body are part of the same thing, right? I'm not ashamed that I'm a black man, the great grandchild child of a slave. That makes a difference too. I think that shows something about me. I'm from West Virginia. I know the demographics. They want to get students from every state, right? Most of the students at Harvard were from Boston and New York. Are the smartest people from Boston and New York? No. It's a state school in a way. You want to bring a lot of people from the local state. I know there's probably tax breaks involved by bringing in students from. So, every school is trying to make ends meet, trying to meet government regulations, but also trying to provide a strong foundation for a future, right? You want students to go out and expand the scope of the school, expand the reach. So not every student's going to be a 4.0, because sometimes 4.0 students maybe aren't the type of extrovert you want, or not every athlete is going to be the academic you want. So someone could be the top flight athlete, but you don't want them because maybe you want someone with a little more this or that. I don't know. I just know from my perspective. But no, I mean, I would win these academic scholarships. So the only school that didn't accept me was University of Richmond, and they didn't because back in the day, to give your SAT scores, send them to a school, it cost $50. And I didn't have $50 to send to University of Richmond, which was in my town I was living in. I was in Richmond for high school. I didn't have the $50, so we sent them a certified copy. My guidance counselor, Miss Johnson, I can't forget her. Right, she was calling Harvard. Right, she was mailing them and pushing them, like, are you going to let us know this young man has options. She pushed. I got to give her credit too. But they didn't accept. They said, we can't accept your application because you didn't give us the SAT scores directly from um,
The
wherever it
college
comes from,
board, the college
the
board. Yeah.
college board. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of proud of that. I'm like, well, university, people can say you went to Harvard. I said, well, University of Richmond didn't want me, but I got into Harvard. I got into Princeton. I got into William and Mary, Army. I just didn't want to take the physical. Um, by that time, I was sort of an anti-establishment kind of kid, and I didn't want to work for the man.
Which is
Like
which
I
is
do.
an easy it's an easy environment to or crowd or mind state to get into, especially growing up at that time, especially being black in the
Yeah.
States. That
So yeah,
was a thread that ran through. So you
yeah.
got
The
it.
LA
You got
riots
it.
occurred right when I was applying for colleges.
I'm
So
sorry.
the LA riots occurred when I was
Yeah,
applying for
yeah.
colleges.
Yeah, so that would play into a lot of that too as well, I would
Yeah.
imagine. So you got into Harvard, what seemed like it was a plan from the start for
Yeah.
you, at least a goal that you wanted to reach into, and
Yeah.
then the people around you actually supported that idea. So from from there, coming out to Japan, now you've been in
Mhm.
Japan now for I think you said something
30
like
years.
30 years at this
Yeah.
point. Um,
Mhm.
and you said the woman you spoke to, the Nigerian woman, said, "Oh, you're American." And actually, you're
Yeah.
not American anymore.
No, I'm Japanese. Yes.
You're Japanese now.
Konnichiwa.
So we'll get into that. So
Yeah.
coming out to Japan, um,
Sorry.
what set your sights here? Or and you said your first experience here was corporate. So
Yeah.
how was that being that
Okay.
foreigner and potentially being that black foreigner uh,
Mhm.
at that time in a company in Japan?
Yeah. So let's talk about getting into Japan. So exchange student in '94. Um, and then I go back, and so reason I wound up in Japan was I was in college at Harvard. You had to study foreign language for 1 year because I didn't test out of a foreign language. So I take foreign language for 1 year, and I said Japanese. Japan seems to be in the news. It was either Japanese or Russian, one of those, because the Soviet Union was sort of coming apart at the time. So I wanted to study a language that would be useful in a new world. So I said Japanese. Studied it. I couldn't quit it. It was hard. I think I was probably the worst student in my mind, at least, but it seemed that everyone else had some sort of connection to Japan in one way or another, some sort of experience. I had none. I was at I went to a lot of office hours with the professors and the teaching assistants, and I asked them, for a lot of help, and I got a lot of help. But studying for the midterm, I said, I really want to do well in this class. And my professor said, Henry, she goes, if you study this language for 2 years, the department will give you the right to study abroad for credit. And I said, I'm actually going to see the world. Finally, I'm finally going to get out of America and see what the real world looks like. So I got the highest score in my exam in that first semester, and I got a what do you call a happy coat, like a special Japanese traditional sort of like Matsuri festival type of coat from my professor for getting the highest score on the semester exam, not midterm, but the actual end of semester exam. So, if I didn't think I could carry my weight at Harvard, I carried my weight. You know what I'm saying? It's just, but everyone, anyway, from that perspective, I'm just saying, I think every kid who applies to Harvard's qualified.
So
Let me just say that straight up.
so 30
Um,
years later now, where's how's your Japanese?
まあ、私の日本語はまあ、どうかな。
Yeah,
You know,
so I
I
imagine
think my
fluent.
Japanese is, I'm
Oh,
fluent.
better.
I'm fluent.